The fluorescent lights flickered as Sarah paced the waiting room floor. Her heart pounded, and her fingers were locked together so tightly her knuckles were white. She'd been here for hours, but time had lost all meaning. All she knew was that her son, her precious Liam, was in a hospital bed fighting for his life. The doctors had assured her they were doing everything they could, but she had long since stopped trusting reassurances. They felt too thin, too hollow to hold on to. She wanted something solid, something real to cling to. She slumped into a chair, barely noticing the way it creaked under her weight. Her mind flashed to memories of Liam's laughter, the way he'd grab her hand with his tiny fingers, his curious eyes gazing up at her as if she held all the secrets of the world. Now that same little boy lay in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, his chest barely rising and falling. The virus had hit him hard, and even though the doctors said he had a chance, the fear gnawed at her like a hungry beast. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom. She'd never been much for prayer, but now it was all she had. She closed her eyes, trying to push the image of her son's pale face out of her mind. She prayed for a miracle, for someone, anyone, to help her. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Standing in front of her was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He wore an old-fashioned hat and a dark overcoat that seemed out of place in the bright, sterile hospital. His presence was calming, like an unexpected breeze on a scorching day. "Are you all right, my dear?" he asked, his voice soft yet clear. Sarah hesitated. I don't know," she stammered. "My son, he's very sick. I'm not sure if he's going to make it." Her voice broke and she felt tears welling up again. The man nodded, his expression one of deep understanding. "I know how hard this must be for you," he said, his tone warm and reassuring. "But I promise you, things are not as dark as they seem. You're not alone." Sarah blinked, trying to steady herself. She was sure she'd never seen this man before, but something about him felt familiar, as though he'd always been there, just waiting for her to notice him. "Who are you?" she asked, surprised by her own question. The man smiled, but didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Sometimes, when we're at our lowest, we're given what we need to keep going. You're strong, Sarah, stronger than you know. And so is Liam. He's a fighter." Sarah swallowed hard, clinging to the stranger's words like a lifeline. "How do you know my name? How do you know my son's name?" The man reached out, taking her hand in his own. His touch was warm, steady. "Names are powerful things, but sometimes it's not about what we know. It's about what we feel." He paused, squeezing her hand gently. "Have faith. Liam is going to be all right." As he spoke, a strange sense of peace washed over Sarah, as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. The tension that had gripped her all night began to fade, replaced by a quiet calm. She wanted to ask more questions, to understand who this man was and how he knew so much, but the words wouldn't come. The man gave her one last smile before turning to leave. "Remember, you're not alone," he said, and then he was gone, disappearing around a corner with a surprising swiftness for someone his age. Sarah sat there, stunned, as the echoes of his words lingered in the air. She looked down at her hand, half expecting to see some mark or sign of his presence, but there was nothing. Only the warmth that remained, fading slowly like the final notes of a song. She waited for a moment, hoping he might return, but the corridor was empty. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Sarah stood up, her mind racing. She glanced around, searching for someone who might have seen him, but the waiting room was deserted. She approached the nurse's station, her heart pounding once more. "Excuse me," she said to the nurse on duty. "Did you see an elderly man? He was just here talking to me." The nurse frowned, looking around as though expecting the man to materialize. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I haven't seen anyone come through here in the last hour. You're the only one here." Sarah shook her head, disbelief flooding her thoughts. "No, he was right here. He spoke to me. He knew my son's name." The nurse offered her a sympathetic smile. "Hospitals can be strange places, especially when we're under stress. Sometimes we see things that feel real, even when they're not." But Sarah knew what she had seen. The man's voice, his touch. They were as real as anything she'd ever experienced. She returned to her seat, her mind swirling with questions. Who was he? And how did he know so much about her and Liam? A few hours later, a doctor approached her, his expression one of cautious optimism. "Mrs. Johnson, we have good news. Liam is responding well to the treatment. His fever has broken, and his breathing has improved. We're not out of the woods yet, but his chances are much better than they were." Relief flooded Sarah's heart, and tears spilled down her cheeks. She thanked the doctor, her voice choked with gratitude. As she made her way to Liam's room, her thoughts returned to the stranger. She felt certain that his words had given her the strength to hold on, to keep believing that her son would pull through. When she finally saw Liam, he was sleeping peacefully, his face no longer pale and drawn. She sat beside him, taking his small hand in hers, and whispered a prayer of thanks. She knew that something extraordinary had happened that night, though she couldn't explain it. Days passed, and Liam continued to improve. Soon, he was well enough to return home, and Sarah's life began to settle back into a familiar rhythm. But the memory of the stranger lingered, haunting her in quiet moments. She found herself wondering if he had been an angel, sent to guide her through her darkest hour. One day, she returned to the hospital, hoping to find answers. She described the man to the staff, asking if anyone had seen him or knew who he was, but no one could recall seeing anyone like him. He seemed to have vanished without a trace, leaving only the faintest whisper of his presence behind. As she walked out of the hospital, Sarah glanced back one last time. She thought she saw a shadow in the corner, a flicker of movement that vanished as soon as she looked. She smiled to herself, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known before. She didn't need answers anymore. She knew deep down that the stranger had been sent for a reason. Whether he was an angel or just a kind soul passing through, she would always remember him as the one who gave her hope when she needed it most. And in that moment, as she looked up at the sky, she felt a quiet certainty that Liam would grow up strong and healthy. She had been given a gift, a glimpse of something greater than herself, and it had changed her forever. Thanks for watching. If you believe in angels, please like and subscribe so that you can watch more heartwarming stories.